Good morning and welcome to your favorite Friday morning podcast, Conversations with Buddy, brought to you by The Rec, way more than a bowling alley. We give you the ability to connect each week with our guest because we believe people matter, you matter. We are grateful to all the listeners who take the time each week to hear the stories of our guests. Please help us grow the show by taking a moment right now and subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and give us a review. Our purpose of this podcast is to impact the world one testimony at a time. My guest this morning is John Marshall. Welcome, John.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Man, it's awesome. Well, you and I we got roped into golf with your dad with the Salem Leadership Foundation a couple weeks ago.
That's right.
It's called Rainfest. It was miserable. I don't know about you, but it was wet and cold and
You mean you didn't feel like you were on a beach in Southern California?
Yeah, no beaches there unless it was a hurricane. I'm not sure. But I think that day we started out, the sun was shining. I'm like, this is really weird. This is Rainfest. It literally is bad. The sun's shining, and there's not really too many clouds in the sky. And after hole one, this system comes in, dumps rain, sun comes out again, it begins to hail, sun comes out again, and then we saw snow. Oh, you had left for the lunch, but it began to snow. So
I think I went through 3 or 4 outfit changes on the course that day.
It's a rough day, man. Well, it's cool that your dad, I've been golfing with your dad for a couple of years, and by the way, I love your dad. I know your mom.
It's mutual.
A little bit, and yeah, it's good. Yeah, we both love your dad. Just a good dude. Anyway, I love to hang out with him, even if it is painful golfing at Rainfest. So, but I enjoyed just hanging out with you for the day because you and I get to ride on the same car together, and I really wanted to learn about you and who's John? Who's this John guy? So let's just.
I'd like to find out too.
I know. Well, maybe that's what this is about. Is an intervention and figure out who John is, right? So John, let me just go through what your list says.
Yep.
You are the son of Nancy and Charlie Marshall. We talked about Charlie. He's the golf coach at Corbin.
Mm-hmm.
He's a good golfer, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You're the brother of Caitlin and Ryan. Is Caitlin the oldest?
Caitlin is in the middle.
She's in the middle. So Ryan is the oldest.
Yep.
You're the uncle to Lucille, Ruth, Charlotte, and Hattie.
Hattie.
Hattie. Beautiful. That's all girls, right?
All girls.
How cool is that?
It's so fun.
Unbelievable, dude.
It's so fun.
I'm a dad to 2 daughters, so I love kids anyway, but I mean, to be an uncle, how cool is that? You can spoil them and like a grandparent, but just ship them home.
When, in the weeks and days and months where, mental health is low, I'm depressed, I need to feel good about myself, I just go hang out with my nieces.
Oh, I want to go hang out with your nieces, man.
They're the best.
Those are cute names.
I'm sure we might get into it, but they are. Someone asked me a few days ago, like, where's your source of hope in the world right now? And I just named Lucille, Ruth, Charlotte, Hattie as 4 humans who talk about places where there's divine illumination. Those 4 girls have it, and they're more conscientious and compassionate and empathetic as 10, 6, 4, and 2-year-olds than I think I'll ever be. I love being their uncle.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. We're going to come back to that. We'll talk more about what do you guys do for fun. But you are an alum of Fay Wright, Judson Sprague, and Whitworth University, and current student at Portland Seminary.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty heavy duty. We're going to go deep on that. And then you're a pastor of community development with Church at the Park, which is really what I want to unpack. What is Church at the Park? Because I know about it, but I really don't know all the deep things, but it will be really awesome. Okay, so you and I golfed a little bit. Let's talk about John growing up. Mm-hmm. I know the schools you went to, and did you play sports? What was John like as a kid growing up, and who are you? We're going to get to the point of who is John today? And that's kind of what we're like, who is John? We don't know.
That's great.
We're going to find out.
I'm here to find out.
We're going to find out, man.
This is like a therapy session. I love it.
This is totally therapy. You didn't know that, did you? It's a conversation with Buddy, but it's therapy.
You know, I pay a legit therapist.
Yeah.
But if this is my free option, I'm just going to come back here every week. If
Every
that's
week
okay.
we'll do this. Yeah. And we all need a therapist, by the
Seriously.
way.
Yes.
I mean,
we can get into that. I mean, yes, we all need
well,
therapy.
we're going to go deep on that because I think that we don't need it. If you need a therapist, you're weak, or mentor, you're weak. But in reality is that's the strength.
Yeah, it's growth only happens in places of vulnerability.
That's deep.
So I would say the exact same thing you just said. The stereotype that asking for help is a measure of weakness
Yeah.
is just, it's false. It's not. And I can use moments of my own story and moments of folks that I've encountered at Church of the Park as evidence of that. But I think the places where we are most willing to throw our hands up and say, I'm not capable of doing this on my own, those are the places where we become who we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Those are the occasions for us to uncover often hard and dark stuff, but then on the other side of it, experience, I think, growth and liberation into freedom of self. And so that to me is strength. And that's where I think, as a pastor, especially, where I find myself just falling in love with humanity over and over again, are in the places where people are willing to confront their darkness and their pain and the brokenness and say, I know I'm made for more than this, and I want to get there.
You know, you're a young guy. What are you, 27?
29.
29? I mean, that's pretty wise just to hear you say that, because I don't know that most men really figure that out. I mean, I'm hoping the Lord's helping me figure it out, but apparently you figured it out. So, okay, who's John? You're the youngest of
youngest of three.
Of three.
Yeah. Brother is 9 years older than me. Sister Caitlin is 5 years older than me. So I grew up. This is the long way around to your first question. Who was I growing up? When I think back on my childhood, I think of myself as the youngest of three, learning to, find my place in the world in the context of my parents' lives, my siblings' lives. Kind of learned how to just go along and being in a world of adults. But found my own joy in football and track. Grew up playing soccer, basketball, all the pee-wee sports, everything except baseball, which is interesting. Never tried baseball as much as my dad and my brother loved it, but would try golf, would try racquetball. Athletics was. I mean, everyone in my family found joy and love in the world of sports, and so that was an easy place for me to find myself as well.
It sounds like you grew up pretty fast, being the youngest, being around older, you said adults, but older siblings as well. You, in a way, you did mature because you weren't hanging around younger, you were hanging around older.
I was with my friend. I was with my siblings and their friends, or if I wasn't with them, I was with my parents and their friends.
And their friends, yeah.
And then, I mean, of course, there were spaces where I was around people my own age, but I was formed most by people in the world who were older than me.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I mean, as a young man, as you are, most young men don't mature. I mean, sometimes I think it's 30. Maybe it's Jesus when he began his ministry, but a lot of times, like, men don't mature until they're 30. Once men can become 30 and they're still not mature, I actually question whether they're ever going to mature. That's just something I've witnessed.
I think one of my biases is all of life is formation.
Okay.
That at every moment of life and what we experience as humans is shaping us in one degree or another. And I think the more that I hang out in context of trauma, especially, And as I think of what it takes for people to become the healthiest, most full, most vibrant versions of themselves, there is this reality where, like, unless you have trusted guides early on in your life, some of the lessons that are really critical and essential are hard to come by on your own.
Yeah.
And so I'm with you. I can kind of start to notice the moments where, kind of as people in my own world, get further and further into adulthood, it kind of just becomes this place of cementing who you've already, cementing who you are.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. If you don't have real lessons early on, and if you don't have people who can help you make meaning out of those lessons and those experiences, it's hard to do it later in life.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you grew up doing lots of sports. You're the kid that would try everything, and that's awesome. Okay, so that went through high school as well?
Went through high school. Football and track were the two places where I really found my love, at least in the sports world, but still found myself, I was the kid who learned to have it all together really early and then tried to maintain having it all together. So I was still in choir. 2012 state champs, baby.
Yeah,
it's a feather in my cap. It's the only thing I get to claim as a championship win in my life. But choir, student leadership, leadership in youth group and young life. There are a lot of places where I found myself investing, and out of this deep, deep desire to feel like I need to keep up and be as impressive as my siblings and as impressive as my parents. But football and track were the two places where I formed the longest lasting relationships as a kid. And a lot of those buddies that I grew up with, they're still the dearest people to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you graduate from high school, you go to Whitworth.
Went to Whitworth.
That's Spokane.
It's in Spokane. Okay. It's a small D3 Presbyterian school. I said yes to Whitworth because both my siblings had attended prior and felt like somehow following that family tradition felt right and true to me. But also it was the only school that recruited me for both football and track.
Okay.
So that, boosted the
that makes it a
ego
of
an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And eventually chose not to pursue football because of a knee injury, but stuck with track.
But you were thinking collegiate football, though.
I was thinking playing football in college.
What position did you play?
All?
Whatever.
I was, the 140-pound kid who could kind of fit himself into a lot of different positions. Primarily was a running back in DB, but, on the special Wildcat packages, got to be the quarterback, was backup punter. That's my favorite.
No kidding.
Favorite credential.
That's awesome, man.
Punter, returner, kicker. So
punter might be the best position to play when you're playing collegiate or pro football. Just like go out there and do your thing, and you're done. If
I could do it all over again, I think being a punter at the professional level. If I could make money for going out 4 or 5 times in a game and swinging my leg once,
done.
Sign me up.
Sign me up for that one. Okay. So college, you're Spokane, you're away from mom and dad. I want to ask you a question. You're a faith dude. When did you give your life to Christ? What does that look like? How do you unpack that?
I grew up in a Jesus-loving home. I mean, our family culture was saturated with faith. And there's a lot of ways, I'm sure, that we could uncover ways that saturation made it hard for faith to feel really authentic.
Yeah.
But the reality of God just always was for me. And I was the kid who didn't want to make a mistake, didn't want to upset the people around me, didn't want to disappoint the adults in my life, because those were the most formative relationships to me. So all that to say, I was the kid who probably, every 6 months invited Jesus into my heart again, just to be sure.
Just to be sure.
And to make sure that,
Okay.
when the children's ministry pastor at church was asking who wants to accept Jesus, my hand was always up because I wanted to be seen as the kid who, I want Jesus in my heart. Absolutely.
Come on.
But
That's good. That's sweet.
So
as a really young age, man,
it was,
you were.
Yeah. There's never a point in my story where I don't think of myself as someone in a relationship with God, following Jesus, thinking about what it means to be a Jesus person. And
you sound like a junior John Mark Comer. You know who John Mark Comer is?
I do.
I really like John Mark Comer. He's all in.
There's been moments where I've wondered, in my own faith journey, like who and where are the places of residence in the tradition, and the more, especially as John Mark kind of finds his niche as a formationist, as someone who thinks really, really deeply about how to become fully human, not just turning faith into this thing that exists from the neck up, but is fully embodied. I've really appreciated the way that he thinks about faith and spirituality and how to combine it all. So all that to say, faith has been a part of who I am and how I think of myself in the world and in the universe since I knew that I was a human being. There's been moments of feeling like I had it all together and knew exactly what that meant and looked like. There's been moments of being at rock bottom. There's been moments of deconstruction and reconstruction. And then there's been moments of me wanting to throw in the towel and give it all up.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I think that's just part of being human.
Yeah. Well, give us an idea, an example when you're at rock bottom, want to throw in the towel. Mm-hmm. Do you want to give an example what that might look like?
Yeah. So the easiest example is in high school and then in college. College was rock bottom for me. So I have an anxiety disorder, mostly precipitated by OCD. And then when those two things start feeding off each other, depression gets thrown in the mix. And so there's this holy trinity of mental unwellness that is part of my story and who I am in the world. So high school was the time that I started experiencing all of those parts of myself all at once. Yeah. And I grew up in a faith community that didn't know how to talk about pain and trauma and mental health. And as I look back on it, I wouldn't say that it was a redemptive way of talking about it. It was the just believe enough, just pray harder.
Yeah.
That if you're struggling, that it's connected to the depth of your faith, or just believe, and if you have enough faith,
it's all good.
It's all good. You can deal with your problems. The pain can go away.
And apparently, that doesn't fix things, does it?
It doesn't fix things. And so that's one storyline where I have had to hold the theological packages that I've been handed really, really loosely to allow the infinite God of the universe to show up in the middle of it all in the context of a real relationship, to hold me, to sustain me, to carry me, to love me, and to give me an identity that is beyond just, do I feel like I have enough faith right now in this moment?
Yeah.
So that's one storyline. Another storyline is, I grew up in the church. I got to college as an 18-year-old. The very first class I took was this class called Biblical Themes of Shalom. And it rocked my world. And what it felt like was that I grew up with 30% of the gospel. And when I encountered this theme of shalom and I started to try to attune myself to this long arc of God's presence in the world, and this long arc of trying to woo all of creation into the most beautiful version of itself, that encounter stirred up new questions and new curiosities. And with questions and curiosities that aren't easily answered, there's always room for doubt and wondering, and the encounters of, oh my gosh, of course God is more infinite and bigger than I'm ever going to understand. And in the place of that overwhelming transcendence, you can get lost.
Yeah.
You it can feel like your feet get lifted off the ground a little bit. And in that place of wondering, what do I really believe? Who do I really experience God to be in my own life and in the world? And can I put language to that in a way that is authentic and true to me and still make sense to the people who I've been in faith community with?
Mm-hmm.
That has been a storyline for me as well, of learning how to make sense of my own experiences as a human being and still remain rooted to a tradition and a language that is shared by more than just me. So there's this like subjective reality and experience that is, the language of personal relationship. And then trying to fit that into a community of unique individuals who are all experiencing this infinitely creative, personal God as well. So those are places where sometimes it's been really hard to name what I believe and feel like it still resonates with people around me, especially in the area of trauma and social justice.
Yeah.
Those are two places where a lot of people have really strong opinions, and so those are the easiest examples I can give.
Yeah, that's deep. Okay, so you go to Whitworth, you get a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the degree, and then when did you begin seminary?
So I first went to Whitworth thinking I was going to study journalism. I thought for sure that I was going to go work for ESPN later on in
Sweet,
life.
you do love sports.
Come
on.
How could I not?
Yeah.
Talking about who my parents are and my siblings. And I love writing. So, my mom's career and her own degree was in journalism. And so I learned early on how to write well, how to tell stories well. And that continues to be a place where I find joy and a sense of kind of connection between like what my own gifts are and ways that I can love the world. So started thinking I was going to study journalism, took a mass media class, learned that was not the world I wanted to exist in. Was doing some reflecting on this class on Shalom and finding that was uncovering a lot of deep, deep passions to love the world, to find myself in connection to places of pain and darkness, and then to ask where do we find God in those places of darkness?
Yeah.
So Whitworth has in its political science department this specific degree called Peace Studies. It's a very, very, very broad degree, but the short explanation of it is understanding how humans, both in like interpersonal relationships, in community dynamics, and both on the international scale, how do humans find themselves in conflict? Like what are the conditions that lead to conflict? And then what are the conditions that allow communities and people to build generative programs of peace? So instead of just thinking of peace as the absence of conflict or the absence of pain or the absence of hardship, thinking of peace as this more proactive, generative mission in the world to set the conditions by which all of humanity gets to flourish and experience everything that it can be. And so that was the degree, Peace Studies. And as I was in that kind of transition and kind of charting out for myself who I wanted to become in the world, I was reflecting with a mentor, Matt Holland, who is pastor here in Salem of St. Thomas Church. So I was sharing all of this with him, and he just looked at me and said, I was a sophomore in college at this point. He goes, you should think about seminary.
Yeah.
And I said, hell no. That sounds terrible. At that point in my life, there was nothing that disturbed me more than the idea of working in a church or calling myself a pastor. Nothing about that vision bubbled up any sense of joy.
Yeah.
but as soon as he said it, it was the seed that planted in my brain that I could never get rid of. And so by the end of my undergrad, it was still the idea in my head, like there's something there that I keep saying no to over and over again, and it won't go away. And, you know, I can look at it and say, well, it's probably a Holy Spirit thing.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it was just like, the only way that I'm going to be able to make sense of this idea is if I just try it. So applied to 2 seminaries, one on the East Coast, and then applied to George Fox, which is now Portland Seminary. Attended for the first year, didn't love it, but then at the end of my first year, took a class with Joel Mayward. It was called The Bible and Contemporary Culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a summer studio course that looked at popular music, popular TV shows, popular films, literature, etc. And instead of creating this paradigm of how, as ministers of the gospel, do we enter the world and impose a worldview or impose God on top of culture, how do we find ourselves in relation to culture in a way that allows us to name where does God already exist and where do we pull out the divine from what's already happening around us? Because if we really believe that God is everywhere,
He is, yeah.
Then all of ministry, all of theological exploration is just, where is God already? What is God already doing?
That's a great question. Where is God already?
And then how do we become partners in this mission to make meaning of the world in a way that makes sense in light of the kingdom? So that class gave me these new categories and these new constructs to think of, what does it mean to actually love the world into its best version in a way that doesn't feel combative, in a way that doesn't feel oppositional or competitive, but partnered with every other person in the world.
Well, love, agape love it's unconditional.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing combative about that, really, from a biblical worldview.
Right.
Secular worldview might be different, but yeah.
Yeah, and I would, like, to that, add on John chapter 3.
Come on.
Verse 17 and following, that the mission and the shape of God in the world is not condemnatory. The first movement of God is not to tell the world where it's wrong. The first movement of God is to be with the world and in the world and to say, I love you so damn much. And I will put myself in every single corner, even the ones that you think are forsaken. And I will be here until you realize that I'm here. And then once you realize I'm here, then together we can start shaping it into something beautiful and magical. And that class helped me change the narrative from how do I change the world, or how do I make the world more Christian?
Yeah.
And turned it into how do I invite the world around me to see Jesus and to become like Jesus and to love Jesus?
I think you make a really good point. I think as Christians, we oftentimes go point out what people are doing wrong, but then God says, or the 2 greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and equally love your neighbors yourself. And then tying in John 3:16 and 17 is for God so loved the world. And then 17, he did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. Mm-hmm. That's a different message than going, you're going to hell. I mean, that is true if you don't believe, but to enter the world and the culture is love first. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And
hey, what a concept, man. Is this new?
And we wonder why people don't always love the church. But I think that is, I think if the world, so many theological conversations right now, like what is the church going to be for the next 500 years? How does the church respond to the realities of contemporary culture in the 21st century?
Yeah.
And I think if the church can learn to identify where God is already at and what God is already doing and just become the people who can point it out rather than trying to name the places that are forsaken by God, where God is absent, where God's love doesn't exist, and then trying to impose a God on top of, like, no one is going to respond to that strategy.
I wouldn't.
But if you said, can you imagine the most beautiful God? Who is that God to you? The God of unconditional love. The God who, in your deepest, darkest places of pain, saddles up right next to you and weeps with you. If we turn the question into, could it actually possibly be true that the God of our wildest imagination, the God that we are most desperate to have, is actually the God that we have? And look, you can see it over there. Yeah. And look, you can see it over there. And look, you might actually, if you think about it with this angle, you might actually see it over there. Mm-hmm. And you might actually see it in that political party, and you might actually see it in that political party. And instead of creating categories where God is and God is not, or what God is for and what God is not,
isn't He omnipresent?
I mean, we say so.
We say verses, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and yet we don't. Or love your neighbor as yourself, and we don't. I mean, we, as the Christian body, can be very hypocritical. And I think we need to put on a new lens, a new set of glasses, and to view people through God's eyes and how He loves them, not how we see them. Because we're human, we sin.
Yeah.
Man, this is deep, man. I didn't know what to expect. That
we got into it fast.
We did. Okay. So how far are you in your seminary? How long is it?
I'll graduate in May. So I've got 2 months.
2 months away. 2 months left. Was this a 2-year course?
I performed the magic trick of turning a 4-year degree into a 6-year degree.
Yeah. Okay. I know that trick.
So it's a 4-year program.
Which you did over 6 years. Which is, you know what? Perfect.
I mean, my sister did her undergrad in 7, so as long as I beat her mark, I'm happy.
I did my 4-year degree in 5, so I know that math.
Yeah.
Hey, it doesn't matter as long as you keep going. And I think God's timing is always perfect. He's got you exactly where He wants you. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn some lessons along the way that you need to learn so that you can go minister to the people you're going to minister to, which really leads us into where you're at today, Church at the Park. So how long have you been at Church at the Park? Unpack Church at the Park. What is it? Who is it? Who's your ministry for? Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the beginning of Church at the Park, and then I'll just put myself into the story.
Boom.
So Church at the Park started in 2007 when our founding pastor, DJ, and his wife, Gabby, and a group of their friends, they were part of a missional community. Some of them participated in it's called the PIT count, point in time count, which is this annual count where service providers and volunteers in one day try to identify every human being who's living outside. So it's this one day initiative to try to identify who in the community, and this is national. Yeah. This happens nationally. So DJ, Gabby, their friends participated in the PIT count in 2007 in Salem, encountered some individuals in Cascade Gateway Park, were inspired by those encounters to ask, what does it mean for human beings who have no idea what it's like to call the outside home, who have no idea what it's like to live on the margins of society? What does it mean for that demographic of human beings to be in real, authentic, mutual relationships with those who are outside and making home under trees and behind bushes? Yeah. So the inspiration was just to do a one-time potluck in the summer, just to take food out, see who would show up, offer some prayer and some relationship. The goal was not to fix or to save or to rescue. Yeah. Wasn't to solve anything. Wasn't even to convert anybody. Yeah. It was just to be in a relationship. And after that first potluck, a member of that group, her name's Julie, she in a time of reflection read the parable from Luke, which is when you host a banquet, don't invite your friends and your family and the ones who can pay you back. Invite the poor and the lame and the crippled. And the punchline of that story is, if you do this, you, the one who's hosting the banquet, you are the one who is blessed. So Julie reads this and says, I've tried to follow Jesus my entire life, and today is the first day that I followed this part of the story.
Okay.
And I actually really like this, and this was, in fact, blessing to me and to us, and I think we can do this again. And the rest of the group looked at her and said, okay, giddy up.
Here we go.
So went out the next month, did the same thing. Month after that. Then it turned into week after week. So each Sunday, a group of folks showed up in Cascade Gateway Park with some food and some hot coffee. And we're just there to be human alongside other humans. And in that context, this really unique, radical community formed, Church of the Park. And the idea was, if the shape of the Trinity is 3 mutually loving, self-giving relationships, if the shape of divinity is community, this Church of the Park community was trying to figure out the way to embody that type of mutual relationship between 2 demographics of people who were conditioned by the world to mistrust each other, to demonize each other, to see the other as the problem in the world. And so in this place where there was no other agenda except to know each other and to love each other well, this really, really beautiful, dynamic and community formed. And next to Cascade Gateway Park, there's a building. It was owned for years and years by the Oregon JCs Foundation, another philanthropic group. It was their state building. So they only used it like 2 times a year for these annual gatherings. And besides those 2 times, it was just an empty building. Somehow they found out that this community was forming, this Church of the Park community, and they just said, the building's yours. Pay utilities, but use it as you want it. So this property became this place of connection and community development. On Sunday mornings, it was the place for gathering and worship and fellowship. Monday through Friday, the community developed a relationship with Marion Polk Food Share and got to put a community garden on site, help people learn how to be in good relationship with the earth that they were living on. There was a clothing closet. There was food box distribution. And the entire premise was to recognize that we as human beings become the most full version of ourselves in the moments that we love and we serve each other. Love God, love neighbor. Like, service is the crucible by which we transform into who we were created to be. It's one of the premises of Church of the Park.
Yeah.
And so the idea was not that people who were living in houses were entering into this context and then just giving out resources and help. The idea was you identified the need, food, clothing, a place to charge your phone, a place to be out of the rain. And then you identify, what does service look like in that context? And then you elevate and invite those who are receiving the services and those who are acutely aware of the pain and aware of the need to be the ones designing the service.
Yeah.
So it was always, you, Johnny, you're waking up in your tent today, but you're walking over to the Church of the Park property because you are the one who's responsible for the food box program.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn how to serve the guy who just stole your sleeping bag last night. It was just my own bias. I've never been a part of a community as radically beautiful as that.
Yeah.
To say to a group of people who has been told by the rest of the world that they are not worth the world's time or attention, or until their behavior improves, are not worth responsibility in the world, and to say, no, actually, the fundamental truth of your being is deeper than that. And the thing that's going to take you to the place where you realize that is to give you the opportunity where you get to prove it to yourself, where you get to be the leader of your community, where you get to contribute and own a community alongside everyone else, where you get to be there's dignity in serving others.
Totally.
So
Jesus said it's better to give than receive, and I come to serve and not be served.
Exactly. I mean,
That's what you're teaching them.
Oh yeah, it's Christmas morning when everyone says, "Oh, the best part is seeing the other person open up the gift I gave them."
Yeah.
It's not opening up my present. It's that moment, that Christmas morning moment, blown up into a community dynamic. So for 10 years, it was just this period of faithfulness where humans were showing up to love and serve each other. It was messy. I mean, you can't enter into a context of trauma and not have mess and not have, really, really hard moments of development and human formation. But for 10 years, that was the shape of the community. And through the trust that was established and built in that environment, the Church of the Park community got to, earned credibility and got to then say yes to opportunities to partner with the city of Salem on some really cool initiatives. So I joined January 1 of 2020 to help with just a overnight warming shelter. So we were part of the Salem Warming Network. It's if anyone's familiar with First Presbyterian or South Salem Friends, those are two congregations that in the winter open up their space for folks who need to be out of the cold and need a place to be. But the way that warming network works is it's temperature activated. So there's usually only enough funding to operationalize warm sleeping spaces when the temperature is below 34 degrees. I don't know if anyone's tried to sleep in 35-degree weather, but it's not much better than 34 degrees.
It's no better. Or 42 and raining.
Exactly. So Church of the Park said, we'll be not 24/7. We'll be a every single night warming shelter. And we were the only ones that weren't temperature activated. And we said, and to deal with the need for volunteers, we're actually not going to go out into the rest of the world and ask for folks to give up their night of sleep to come be here. We have all the relationships with the folks in the park who would just as gladly come serve their neighbor and be in a warm place too. So it was a warming shelter run by those who needed the warming shelter for their friends who needed the warming shelter. And it was in partnership with Arches. And so I got to be kind of just really what it was a peer mentor. My job was as a coordinator, so I was doing some scheduling and some logistics back-end help, but I just got to show up and help people think about, okay, that guy is over at the coffee stand yelling at the top of his lungs. What does it mean to love that person and that human well right now? And let's talk about it and let's think about it. And instead of just demonizing that person and saying, get out of here, you're not allowed to be here.
Yeah.
Can we find a way of intervening in those moments of trauma that dignifies his own experience and his own humanity, that protects the safety of people around him? So there was this invitation to think deeper than just, oh, they've got a warm place to be tonight. Our job's done.
We're good.
Now it's, how do we see a human being as someone who is more than their behavior? And how do we chart the pathway as a community to create the conditions by which that person can now live into their identity as a full human? So that was 2020. Then it was 2020.
Yeah.
And the world shut down.
Yep.
And rightly, and I think very astutely, the city of Salem recognized that our neighbors who were living outside represented a really vulnerable population of people within the timeline of the pandemic. And so some funding and some resources became available. I got to help develop a safe parking program. So we recruit churches and businesses who don't use their parking lots overnight to be places where people who are living in their cars can go park and get a good night's rest, because there's no legal place for people to park their cars in Salem overnight. So this was a way that we could invite local congregations to partner with us in a really low impact way. People who are living in their vehicles got to actually get a good night's sleep, and then they had energy during the day to actually go problem solve and connect with resources. We got to meet a need at the city level and with Salem PD, because they were allocating resources and personnel to go knock on windows and say, you can't be here, and issue citations that we're never going to get paid anyway. And in the midst of that development of relationships, the city of Salem there was a growing trend to think about how to provide targeted services to folks in literal homelessness outside of a system, a sheltering system that didn't have enough beds on a given night. So, for example, there's probably about 2,000 people right now. That's the rough estimate. About 2,000 in Salem who would qualify under the category of homeless. Right now, Salem only really has about 1,000 shelter beds on a given night. And when I started at Church of the Park, that number was more like 300. So there's this huge need to actually connect resources to those living outside in a way that was sustainable and safe. Because the answer is not to a service provider, go wander all the parks and look for your client. And maybe they're there and maybe they're conscious and maybe they're sober. Like that's not a sustainable strategy for any service provider. So the dream was, can you create some sort of environment that you might call like managed camping, a space where it's low barrier, low impact. You allow someone to have the dignity to control their own living space, but it's in an environment that is closely connected to services and has safety and supervision and personnel on site. So we were invited by the city to do this 3-month pilot project at the Oregon State Pavilion. We hosted about 100 individuals inside the pavilion building. Literally, they set up tents inside the building, and those were their living quarters. But we had staff on site 24/7. There was showers on site. There was laundry service on site. There was private meeting space for service providers to come to our location and now meet with their client behind closed doors and have really, really essential problem-solving conversations. So not only were those we were hosting safe and dry and warm and well-fed, but now all of those agencies who were trying to find a way to steward their resources well had a space where they could actually do it. And the project was far more successful than any of us really even imagined it could be. So we learned if you provide safety, if you provide support, case managers on site, people who can help navigate through the system that's really convoluted and there's tons of hoops to jump through. And if it's sanitary, so people can feel like a clean human being in the world, the level of anxiety that people carry in their bodies drops dramatically. And all of a sudden they can start accessing higher levels of cognition and problem solving. And they can actually, like once you provide a stable, secure place for people to be at night, and they're not worried about, is my stuff going to get stolen? Every other issue that they have to work on becomes so much easier to tackle and find solution for. So that pilot project was January to March of 21. And then that provided the lessons and the foundation for us to start doing micro-sheltering. And so we've got 3 micro-shelter communities running right now. One is on Center Street across from Safeway. That's for our general population location. We call it, or it was named by the residents, Village of Hope. And we've got capacity for about 80 individuals there. Our family shelter is up north at near the Kroc Center on property owned by Catholic Community Services. We've got capacity for about 150 there, I think 160. And then we just opened about 6 months ago a site for young adults, youth and young adults ages 18 to 24 out on Turner Road. So the property that was our kind of day center gathering space has become a dedicated shelter space for young adults. And so what started as in 2007, this one-time idea to host anybody that might show up that day from the park has grown into now hosting 250 individuals every single day in our spaces.
Crazy. With
an outreach team that's making more connections out in the world, with a safe parking program that is connecting people and vehicles to congregations. So that's the
safety, support,
sanitation,
the 3 S's. That's what I gathered. Well, that's kind of what our needs are, really. I mean, we all need that.
Yeah, it's Maslow's hierarchy.
Yep.
Once you can meet the basic needs of survival, then a human's capacity to self-actualize and become and to get out of survival mode into a human who knows what they have to give back to their community, who can start contributing to the relationships around them. In survival mode, all you're thinking about is making it to the next day.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to offer solutions to folks in homelessness, because they're just in survival mode. And so it's near impossible to do any long-term problem solving. It's why behaviors are so erratic. It's why behaviors are so violent often outside. It's because these humans are in a place of survival mode. And once you can offer a stable, safe, sanitary environment where that anxiety drops, then the behaviors follow suit.
Interesting. That's awesome, man. You really impact a lot there. I didn't know any of that. I mean, I've known about Church of the Park, but I really didn't know. I knew it was dealing with homeless people, but I didn't know the extent.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, dude, you really unpacked a lot there. Lots to think about. We're going to wrap up here in just a moment, but is this something you think you can see yourself doing in 10 and 20 and 30 years? Is this what God's called you to do? Wrap up on just a note on what the future looks like for Church of the Park and for John.
The future for Church of the Park is that we will always be a community that is asking, what are the needs of our most vulnerable neighbors? And then how can we organize ourselves around those needs to create an environment of safety and dignity? So that could look like micro-sheltering for the foreseeable future. It might not, but that's okay with us. It's kind of a core tenet of our identity that we want to be flexible enough to respond to the needs of the world. Right now, I think micro-sheltering is a really, really, really viable step in the continuum of care. Half of everyone we're exiting from our program. So not everyone is successful.
Okay.
That's part of life.
For life, yeah.
But we get to celebrate that 50% of those who are exiting our program are exiting into positive destinations.
It's fantastic.
That's miles ahead of national averages. So we want to continue loving the world in the way that we can. And right now, this is a way that we get to love the world. And we're going to say yes to it for as long as there's an opportunity to do that. We're always looking for new properties and new investors and new developers and people who want to come alongside and do that work with us. So we're here, and we'll be here for as long as there's people to love and a need to meet.
Yeah.
For me personally, I don't know what my future will be. I think I absolutely believe that right now I am called by God to be a pastor to those living outside in Salem, Oregon. But I think my vocation is similarly just to identify my neighbors in need, and then to ask how can I be someone who attends to those needs and offers radical compassion and a God of nonviolence to those people who are traumatized. So that might be pastoring. It might be something else. I try my best to hold that all with an open hand.
God's got a plan, though, no matter what. I like the word you wrote, or you said it was radical compassion. Mm-hmm. That might be the title of this episode, because that's what I hear. It's radical.
Mm-hmm.
God's ways are radical, and you really unpack what it all means to be a Jesus follower, to love people really the way God loves them. It's radical. Mm-hmm. So, well, brother, we're going to wrap up here. I just want to say thanks for being willing to come on the podcast. We only met a couple weeks ago. You're like, yeah, I'll do it. Cool. And it seemed like you're pretty excited about it, so I'm glad that you were. And
yeah.
You articulate well. You are well studied. That's really cool. I love that as a young man.
Well, I love talking about the people I love.
Okay.
So when you invited me on, it was an easy yes to come talk about the people I encounter
Yeah.
and my own family.
Yeah.
To start with my nieces. I mean, as much as I would love to talk about John Marshall, there are just so many more interesting people and things in the world that I'm inspired by. So I appreciate that I got to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks for coming on and just sharing who John Marshall is and really how God's working in your life, because that's really what we want to hear is, yeah, we like John, but how's God working in your life also? So
I appreciate the reminder that there's someone more important than me.
I know we think we're pretty cool, and we are. Yet there's work to be done. And
I mean, speak for yourself.
Yeah, come on, exactly. Well, cool. Thanks, John, for being here. Thank you all for listening each week, and thank you for listening to John's story. Hey, John, if somebody wanted to reach out to you just to hear more about Church at the Park, about seminary, following Jesus, how would they get a hold of you?
The easiest way is to go to the Church of the Park website.
Okay.
Church. Okay. This is the the hardest part of my job. Our website is church-at-the-park.org, and there's actual hyphens in between those words.
Okay.
So church-at-the-park.org. And on there, you can find some headshots of our leadership team.
Yeah. And
my email is right below my picture. So
okay. We'll put that in there as well. So, well, cool. Reach out to John and hear more about Church at the Park, maybe how you can get involved through finance, through prayer, through showing up. So, again, thank you all for listening this week. We'll see you next week. Thank you all for taking the time each week to be encouraged, challenged, and loved. Remember what Jesus said? I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. My hope and prayer is that you believe the words of Jesus. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.